don't look or act much like a muse, but the fact is I am. And I'm here to tell you that anyone can be a muse. The year, the times of 1907. At the turn of the century, Americans were feeling optimistic and confident. As Senator Chauncey Depew of New York said, "There is not a man here who does not feel 400% bigger in 1900 than he did in 1896. Bigger intellectually, bigger hopefully, and bigger patriotically." And in 1907, the year of this reenactment, the nation's prosperity could be seen in grocery stores well stocked with low prices, favorable conditions for farmers, low taxes, brisk trade, and an assortment of new and useful devices. Americans at that time were fascinated by the telephone, the typewriter, and the sewing machine, the self-binding harvester, and the automobile. In 1907, Theodore Roosevelt was president, and his personality reflected the energy and optimism of the country's mood. 1907 was a time when men were considered the master sex. They controlled the nation's business, and they produced most of the country's art and literature. At home, they were considered, at least in theory, masters of their households. And most American men took pride in being family men. In 1907, women had not yet achieved the right to vote. Americans believed that women's place was in the home, and many women learned to get their way through use of feminine wiles. Romantic fiction created an ideal of a beautiful, fashionable, and genteel woman. And this era of romance produced artist Charles Gibson's likeness of the Gibson girl, tall, pretty, and beautifully dressed. For children, it was a time of strict rules when fathers were not inclined to spare the rod and when children were to be seen but not heard. As a result, children became self-reliant, using their imaginations and handy books, which showed them how to make items such as boomerangs and war kites, how to skin a bird, how to maintain a bicycle, and how to organize a girls' club. In 1907, Clio, South Carolina had entered a period of unprecedented prosperity which had been in progress since around the turn of the century. And the events which led up to this had as much to do with the history of Clio as with our nation's era of optimism. Known earlier as Ivy's Crossroads, the town that became Clio developed around the crossroads at Captain McLaurin's muster ground, which was already a meeting place for Eastern Marlborough by 1825. The town was known briefly as Hawleysville after Francis Hawley of Connecticut, who settled and opened a store around 1827. With the establishment of a post office in 1836, the village received the name of Clio after the Greek muse of history. The hamlet remained small through the antebellum period. As the area recovered from the Civil War and its aftermath, agricultural production accelerated, and development within the village increased in proportion. Then, in 1882, a circular area, a mile in diameter and centering at the crossroads, became incorporated as the town of Clio. 1895, almost 100 years ago, was a very important year for Clio because in 1895 the first railroad line came to Clio, and this provided the town for the first time with efficient transportation to central markets. This prompted a burst of development in the immediate area of warehouses and cotton gins, and by the turn of the century, Clio had become a cotton boom town. Cotton production nearly doubled in Marlborough County between 1899 and 1909, and much of this was marketed and shipped by rail from Clio. So local entrepreneurs took advantage of this opportunity to develop or expand business and agricultural interests, and the older wooden stores and warehouses very quickly gave way to more substantial brick structures. In 1907, the Marlboro Herald, Marlboro Democrat, printed the remark of Major R.A. McIntyre of Bethel Military Academy, Virginia. Major McIntyre was a Marlboro native who was on a visit to the county. He said, "I was especially impressed by the proud development of Clio and the business energy and capacity of her citizens, which found expression in stores and magnificent private residences." Please join me as we take a stroll through 1907 Clio. If you will, please close your eyes and take a deep breath as I take a deep breath. And when you open your eyes, you will have a very different view of the scene around you. Imagine, if you will, that the spot on which you stand lies beside an old wooden schoolhouse. And in the place where you saw the brick store, there will be a more modest structure, a white wooden church of the brick church. You will see a white wooden church with a bell tower and steeple. And you will hear the sound of birds more distinctly than before. The air is fresh and cool. When you open your eyes, you'll see a more peaceful pastoral scene in 1907 Clio. Please open your eyes to the count of 3. 1, 2, 3. Your first stop will be across the street at the Calhoun home. There we will meet 25-year-old Marcella Calhoun, who is living with her father, A.L. Calhoun Sr., and her mother, Bree Woodley Calhoun. Marcella's 64-year-old father, Archibald Lucas Calhoun, served in the Civil War and was one of the men responsible for bringing the railroad to Clio. He will die next year in 1908. Marcella will be married on December 26th and will move to the Parnassus area with her husband, Bromfield Drake Rogers, and the couple will return to live with Marcella's mother upon Mr. Calhoun's death. The house will be Marcella's home, where she will raise her family and remain until her death in 1969.
Won't you? Oh, I suppose cooking is women's work, but you know, my mother taught me how to cook. She just didn't teach me to like it. You'll have to excuse me for not introducing you to my parents. They're out back working in the yard. There's a lot of work to be done around here, you know, and Mama believes in staying busy. I suppose that's how she came to plant all these trees. There's peaches and pears, there's figs, pecans. Mama makes jams and preserves. She doesn't believe in letting anything go to waste. I suppose that came from being a young bride right after the Civil War. You know, food was scarce back then, and you had to make things go as far as they could possibly go. My Mama can peel a peach or an apple so thin you can see right through the peel. Well, I know it's hard to believe, but Mama doesn't work all the time. She likes to walk, likes to go visit family. About 3 or 4 mornings a week, she walks on up to my brother's house and visits with his wife, Sally. She thinks a lot of Sally. Helps her do this, that, or the other around the house. Now, my brother owns that new brick building up on the corner. His house is on down from there past the railroad tracks. And my sister Macy lives just 2 doors down with her husband, Jim Medlin. That's all Medlin land up there. They all grew up on that home place up on the left as you go out of town. That house was built before the Civil War. Did you know my father fought in the Civil War? He was born in 1843, and while he was still in his teens, he joined the United States Volunteers for the Confederate States Army. He was captured at Gettysburg, and he spent the balance of the war in a northern prison. Now, when the war was over, he was transported to Wilmington, and from there, he walked the rest of the way home. The day he came home was the 4th of July. There was a big picnic down at Dunbar, Medlin Springs. All the family went, except for my grandfather, my father's father. He stayed home. Said he just had a feeling. Sure enough, on that very day, that's the day his boy came home. My father said he saw a heap while he was in the war, a heap more than he wanted to see. Now remember me telling you about the Medlin place up on the left as you go out of town? Well, Sherman's men came through there. Now Will Macy Evans, who's married to Dr. Evans and lives next door, she was only 2 years old when Sherman's men came through. Her sister Alice was only 4 or 5, and Alice was really proud of her baby sister. She told the soldiers all about them and asked them if they wanted to see her. Well, now, the family was frightened of Sherman's men, as were all who were visited by them. They demanded food, they made them cook chickens for them, went through the house. But because of little Miss Alice begging them not to hurt her little sisters, they did not harm, take, or destroy anything. And one of those soldiers said that was the ugliest baby he had ever seen. And when my father walked home from Wilmington, my grandfather divided the family farm among his 4 children. And my father began the major occupation of his life, farming. He married my mother, LaGree Woodley, in 1872, and they had 8 children, but only 4 of us made it to adulthood. He built this house in 1896, and that's when my mother, my sister Tennessee, and I moved into town. Now, in addition to farming, my father operated a general store with his brother John in the early 1870s. Along with 4 other men, he helped advance the money necessary to bring the first railroad to Clio in 1895, and that made it possible to get the cotton to market. This town has changed in the past 10 years. A lot of new buildings have been going up. Well, I remember coming into town on my first day of school to that building right across the street, Clio Academy, while my classmates and I helped sweep up the shavings from the construction. I can remember visiting with family, having Sunday dinners together, walking in the woods, eating strawberries, playing with my cousin's goat. It's hard to believe I'll soon be married. I'll be marrying Bromfield Drake Rogers on December 26th. Would you like to hear about my wedding? I'll be married in there in the parlor. I'll come downstairs wearing a lovely white dress and carrying a tiny lamp in my hand right before the wedding. Oh, they'll be sure to have those little cakes in the shapes of tiny slippers and bells. Or perhaps Bromfield's family will have an inn fair. You do know what an inn fair is, don't you? That's a party given by the groom's family the day after the wedding in the groom's house. Sometimes there's dancing all night long, and they'll be sure to serve homemade syllabub. Syllabub's a drink. It's a mixture of cream, sugar, wine, and sometimes a little whiskey. You have to beat it with a whisk. And it's best if you drink it in the wintertime, because if you make it in the summertime, sometimes it turns to butter. It's a dainty, delicate drink, and it's made in a great big barrel, so it can be piled high in as many goblets as you wish. Well, some folks say you aren't married properly without syllabub. Oh, but enough of my plans. I know you have places to go. I understand you're stopping at my brother's store up on the corner. He just built that brick building this past year. We're all so proud of him. Be sure and ask to see the millinery department. I understand he has some lovely hats this season. It was so nice of you to come visit. You come back when you can.
Thank you, we enjoy it.
Shortly, you will meet A.L. Calhoun, Jr., one of the young, prominent businessmen of Clio. Mr. Calhoun built a brick store building this year to replace a wooden one, which was moved to the back of the lot. Electric lights will be installed in this brick building in 1908, the first electric lights in any store building in Clio. A generator located at the oil mill will supply the electricity. Mr. Calhoun owns one of the largest and most valuable farms in South Carolina. In addition to his Clio business, he conducts similar enterprises in Bennett and Bonneville.
May I help you? I'm sure I'll have what you're looking for. Just as my advertisement says, I'm a dealer in everything, and that's about the truth. From baby cribs to caskets, from toothpicks to automobiles, from dry goods to foodstuffs, hardware, feed, seed, fertilizer. You ladies may be interested in our fall millinery opening. Go ahead and compare our hats to those found at the Covington Company or at Sternberger's. I'm sure you'll find something to your liking. How do you like my new brick building? Have to keep in step with the times, you know. I guess you've noticed the other brick buildings going up around. You'll notice the Sternberger block of stores built on that tract that Emanuel Sternberger bought from Mr. Kinshaw back in 1896. Walls between those 3 stores are made of plaster. Now, Mr. Sternberger rebuilt his new brick store building in 1906 on the same site that his wooden store burned in 1904, and it's now one of the largest department stores in the state of South Carolina. I remember the day that Sternberger's corner burned. My wooden store had a shingle roof, and we had to wrap those shingles in wet blankets and keep them wet all during the night to keep the store from catching fire. A lot of fires around here. We have to start over, we have to rebuild, and that's what Mr. Sternberger did. He's now living in Greensboro. He built a cotton mill in Greensboro in 1898, and then he and his family moved from Clio to Greensboro in 1902. He felt the mill needed his personal direction, but he had just built that beautiful Queen Anne style home for his bride. He married Bertha Strauss in 1900, built his house in 1901, and now he's gone. Joe Strauss is managing his business here in Clio. It's a credit business. The farmers establish credit, which they use throughout the year, and then they settle their accounts once a year after the harvest season. Mr. Sternberger came from Germany, but he's now an American citizen, and I've heard it said that he has the mind of a giant and the heart of a child. Now, my neighbors, Mr. Bennett and Mr. Covington, they're successful men. Just one of their enterprises is the Southern Music and Sewing Machine Company, which they chartered just 3 years ago, April 1904. They have wholesale and retail pianos, organs, sewing machines, and a variety of musical merchandise. You know, music is quite popular these days, and every cultured lady wants at least one musical instrument in her parlor. And my wife Sally is no exception. She's a dear lady, and we have such dear children. Little Tennessee is 5 years old now, and little son Legree will be 3 years old this December the 21st, and little Olney is 5 months old, and they're a family to be proud of. I just love to load them in my new locomobile and take them for a ride in the country for all the world to see. There's not too many automobiles in these parts. Most of my customers still arrive on horseback or buggy. I remember one afternoon I stepped out of the store to get some fresh air, and a fellow came up on his horse, and he told me he'd give me a nickel if I'd hold his horse for him. And so I said I would, and he went into the store and he told one of my clerks that he wanted to see Mr. A.L. Calhoun. And my clerk said, well, that's Mr. Calhoun out there holding your horse. Well, I'd best get back to my inventory. Please do take a look at my hats. I'm sure they'd be quite striking.
We will meet 34-year-old Adrina Bennett Covington, wife of John Clarence Covington and sister of Henry Bennett, at whose home she is making a brief visit. Adrina's husband and brothers are prominent businessmen in the community. Adrina is a graduate of Limestone College with a major in art and music, which is a novelty for the period. So rare are college-educated women in this time and place. Adrina is standing on the porch of her brother Henry Bennett's home, which is an excellent example of the Queen Anne style of architecture. It has a polygonal turret with tent roof, a wraparound porch, stained glass transom windows over doors and windows, and it is generously embellished with the traditional Victorian ginger.
I just thought I would come out for a bit of this fine, fresh air. Don't you detect just a hint of fall in the air? It's the kind of day that makes you just want to sit on the porch like the rest of the world goes on. I've been to a piano recital. I just dropped by for a visit with my brother Henry and his wife Loretta. I brought this new issue of the Ladies' Home Journal. I wanted to show Loretta some of the beautiful dolls' clothes that can be made for Christmas on a sewing machine. I guess it's rather convenient that my brother and I live in such close proximity to each other. You see, JC and I and our 3 children live next door. And then the next house over belongs to Mr. A.L. Calhoun Jr. Now he owns that big brick store down there on the corner. It's across from Mr. Sternberger's store. Did you know that Mr. Sternberger's store is one of the largest in the state? He lived in this beautiful 10-room house here. He built it in 1901 for his bride. But then later, he moved his family to Greensboro. And a Mr. Welch bought the house. Mr. Sternberger and his family are Jewish. When he was a small boy, he came over from Germany, and he went to live with his brother in Florence. And then later, when he was a little bit older, his father sent him money to start his own business. Well, he had heard about Marlborough County and our rich farmlands and our hard-working farmers. So one day, he just rented a horse and a buggy, and he set out to take a look about the country. That was about 20 or 30 years ago, and he decided to settle in Clio. So he rented from Colonel Edens. Now, Colonel Edens was in the House at that time, the state legislature at that time, and he took a great, fine interest in the boy. He thought him to be thrifty and ambitious and industrious. So he began to be sort of his counselor, and he loaned him his books and helped him and advised him. It's no wonder that Mr. Sternberger has achieved such great success. There are a great number of children on our block, particularly boys. They like to get together and roller skate out here out front on the sidewalk in front of our house. I have a son, Carl. He's 12. And I have a son, Osborne, who is 9. And then there's little Elizabeth. She just celebrated her 3rd birthday last week. My husband, JC, is a wonderful man. He was teaching school when we first got married, but then later he gave up teaching and he moved us out to the Hebrew community of Clio just for a while, where he took up farming. My father had left me quite a bit of land out in that area, but then when Carl was born and Osborne was born, JC also opened up a dry goods store down here downtown, and he sells general merchandise. He's such an optimist, and he has a great sense of humor, too. JC says, always take what comes and look at the sunshiny side of life. Have I told you about my daughter Elizabeth? Oh, she's my pride and my joy. Right now I'm working on a brand new dress for Elizabeth for Christmas, and I'm sewing it on my sewing machine. Aren't these sewing machines just remarkable instruments? You see, my husband was one of the corporators of the Southern Music and Sewing Machine Company in town. They sell pianos and organs and general music, merchandise, and sewing machines. Well, did I tell you that I studied art and music at Limestone College? I really don't have a lot of time right now to spend on my charcoal drawings and my oil paintings, but I do have a few pieces of my work hanging in the front 2 rooms over at my home. Since the children have been born, it's quite hard to do the artwork, but I still play the piano and the organ. And JC and I often play duets together. I'm going to start little Elizabeth with piano lessons soon. I think I'll have her practice at least 1 hour a day. I have the feeling that she's going to be very good at this when she finishes her training. You see, I feel that a well-rounded education is very important to children. That's why I read to them frequently, especially Bible verses. I regard this as vital to their upbringing. You know, there's quite a few articles on child rearing in this new Ladies' Home Journal. A lot of excellent ideas. This last December's issue promised a bigger and better magazine in 1907, and looking at this one, they're certainly living up to their promise. Just listen to this from the editor's personal page. A new series of vital articles to be added to the A larger magazine this coming year will make possible what we have long wanted to do, namely to add to the whole present contents a series of distinctly vital articles, such articles as will make us think, filled with throbbings of modern life. For instance, Helen Keller, the wonderful blind girl, will surprise thousands with an article on unnecessary blindness, showing that 25,000 cases of present blindness may have been prevented. Mrs. Mary G. Eddy, head of the Christian Science Church, rarely writes for the magazine, but will, in an article for the journal, write on one phase of her science book. And also, Judge Ben Lindsay, the famous judge of Denver Juvenile Court, will open the eyes of thousands of parents by laying at their home door the blame of why many of our girls go wrong. Also, President Seeley of Smith College will discuss the growing question, why sororities in girls' colleges are wrong. And so on, and so on. There's also a great deal in the magazine on piano playing and organ playing and lots of music, lots of sheet music. We enjoy singing around at our house, and we often gather around the piano to sing or sing along. Would you like to sing some with me? I think you'll know the first one. From 1903, Sweet Adeline. Wouldn't you like to sing with me? Sure. In the evening when I sit alone a-dreaming of days gone by, love to me so dear, there's a picture that in fancy oft appearing brings back the time, love, when you were near. It is then I wonder where you are, my darling, and if your heart to me is still the same. For the sighing wind and nightingale are singing, are breathing only your own sweet name. Can you sing with me? Sweet Adeline, my Adeline, and my dear heart, for you and all my dreams, your fair face gleams, you're the flower of my heart, sweet Adeline. Very nice. And would you like to sing another one? I know you know this one. It's from 1903, and it's the Grand Ole Flag. You ready? You're a grand old flag, you're a high-flying flag, wherever east and wave. You're the emblem of the land I love, the home of the free and the brave. Every heart beats true to the red, white, and blue, where there's never a post or a brag. Let old acquaintance be forgot, keep your eye on the grand old flag. Wonderful. Now here's one that I think you'll really like. It's from this year, 1907. School days. Nothing to do, Nellie darling. Nothing to do you say? Let's take a trip on memory ship back to the good old days. Sail to the old village schoolhouse, anchor outside the school door. Look and see, there's you and there's me, a couple of kids once more. School days, dear
shortly meet Reverend J.J. Brown, who was called to serve the churches, the Presbyterian churches in Clio and McCall in 1907.
Presbyterian Church. I'm honored to welcome you and I'm honored to tell you a little about the religious life of this fine community. I regret that my knowledge is limited, however. I've just arrived here this year and I'm serving the McCall and the Clio churches. Prior to my arrival, these churches were served by Reverend H.M. Dixon. He was the first pastor of the Clio Church. The commission to organize a Presbyterian church met at Clio in December of 1897 with 19 members present. After consultation, it was decided that the way was clear for a church organization, but that organization was delayed until a church building should be constructed. The building committee was instructed immediately to begin construction, and the Ladies' Aid Society was formed to raise funds for the church. There are a number of other churches in the Clio community, and I will mention just a few of them. The Baptist Church is located on the corner of Church Street and Red Bluff, and it was organized in 1876. The building was completed in 1877. Trinity United Methodist Church stands on Society Street. It's a fairly new building, having been built in 1903. There was an older church building, but it was destroyed by fire, and it seems that the reason for that fire was that it was heated by stones. And I hear that the day the church building burned was the same day of a funeral, the funeral of a prominent Clio citizen. The funeral procession, I understand, continued on even after they received news of the fire. There's also the St. Peter's AME Zion Church. I'm told that a half acre of land was given in 1882 to be used for a church, and the members immediately began to raise money and constructed a church building. The following year, however, the building was destroyed because it was struck by lightning, but members got together and soon replaced that building with a new structure. Would you like to come in and see the inside of the Clio Church? You might wish to rest for a moment, and so please come in. Clio is a God-fearing community. People are so dedicated to their churches. I think of a story of a young girl who went early one morning to the house of her cousins, and she walked in calling their names. She didn't find them. She wandered around the house, and finally she heard voices coming from the bedroom, and she went into the bedroom and found her aunt and her 3 boys on their knees in the closet in prayer. I'm also impressed by the dedication of the women of the Clio churches. Our church has a Ladies' Aid Society, like most of the churches in town. The Ladies' Aid Society meets regularly, and the ladies are usually escorted to these meetings by their husbands, except when the meetings are canceled by rain. When it rains, of course, it's very difficult to drive buggies, especially on our very, very sandy streets. The Ladies' Aid Society Work Committee has raised a great deal of money in the sale of shirtwaists and bonnets. The ladies have diligently sewed these items in their meetings and at their homes. Of course, in their meetings, there are also songs and scripture readings, instructive articles on family life, and becoming more consecrated and holy. The ladies rightfully reward themselves after these meetings or during these meetings with delicious refreshments, usually ambrosia and cake. Of course, we also have a number of dedicated men in our church. They contribute their time as well as their money, sing in the choir, work on various committees, and generally do everything that's needed around the church. And of course, there is much work to be done in the church and in the community, particularly for the religious training of our children. They are never far from the devil's evil influence. Mr. Evan tells me about his son Will, who came in one day at dinner and let out a string of obscenities about this long. Son, where did you hear such language? Oh, I've been going to Mr. Paul Wood's cussing school. Well, it seems that Mr. Paul Wood's cussing school is down on the branch right by the schoolhouse in the woods. Yes, we must be mindful of the lure of evil. Will you join me in prayer for our community? Let us pray. O Lord, our Creator, by your holy prophet, you taught your ancient people to seek the welfare of the places in which they lived. We commend our neighborhood to your care, that it might be kept free from social strife and decay. Give us strength of purpose and concern for others, that we may create here a community of justice and peace, where your will may be done through your Son, Jesus Christ, our Lord. Amen. You may notice the beautiful stained glass windows in this little church. These will be added in 1952. There was a young man in the church who was 14 years old, and his family was actually from Pennsylvania, and he would make vacation trips there and saw the windows in the churches in Pennsylvania. And his dream was to see windows like those churches in his home church. This young man died suddenly at age 14 in 1952. And the community came together, and church members came together, and remembered that his dream was to have windows, stained glass windows in the church that he loved so much. And it wasn't very long before all of the windows were subscribed to, and there are plaques under each window for memorials for the donors and for the families. And also the medallion back here was donated in the same period. There is also a pot Bennett stove back here that provides heat. And that will be removed and the shorter pews moved up front, so that they were originally, of course, to provide space for the pot Bennett stove. If any of you need a bathroom break, there are restrooms in the building behind, in the educational building. So just rest a minute, make yourselves comfortable, and when you're ready, you can continue on your tour. Take a break in the restrooms if you need to. Thank you for coming today.
Clio girls discussing the formation of a girls' club, which they find described in the pages of the American Girl Handbook. The handbook reads, make out a list of the girls you intend to invite to join the club and ask them to meet at your house. Explain your plans and let the would-be members sign the Constitution, which should previously be written out in a blank book with the name of the club, date, and the full name of the founder of the society. Later, if the club finds the Constitution adopted inadequate for its needs, it may be amended to suit the society.
Well, if you want me to be in your girls' club, you gotta catch me first. Come back here.
Our next stop will be at the store of Alexander Ivy, a prominent African-American entrepreneur of the Zion Church Tract community, which is the center of Clio's African-American community. Mr. Ivy's store is probably a general store. The structure is similar to the wooden buildings that were present on Main Street before the construction of brick buildings.
Persons of color who were early owners of land construction were German and Marjorie Breed, Agner and Victoria Holly, and Jim and Bertie Ann Breed. The land was purchased from full-scale Rogers. Most of us relied on agriculture as a living. Small farms were tended with mule and plow. We have also learned other trades such as painters, barbers, nurses, and some of us work with the railroad. As for myself, I own this store here. My land extends from this store all the way down to the Zion Church Streets track. We grow crops such as cotton, corn, tobacco, soybean, wheat, and rye. We are hard workers. We value hard work in our churches and in our schools because we realize that through education we will be able to see the success of our children and our grandchildren. I have 10 children. Let me tell you about one of my children, Walter. And Walter is a strong young man. Walter has been on my place every year except for 1 year when he rented from Mr. McClellan. The reason why Walter did not stay that year was because he felt that there was not enough land for all of us to tend. Walter is a strong young man. He is a proud young man. I dream of his success and the success of his children. He would do well to put his shoulder to the wheels of energy in this county. We must cooperate with those who have the power to help us on our way. Perhaps you would better understand this if I read to you a letter that I wrote to the Marlboro Democrat in February of 1896. I want to share this letter with you. Mr. Editor, please give me a little space in your appreciated paper to mention some facts about the land which was purchased by the colored people of Clio a few years ago when a great rumor was afloat about the colored people going to Arkansas and other western states. We, the people of Clio, came together and organized an association and proposed to buy land in this county and raise whatever we could. At that time, money was scarce and times were very hard, and we could not raise the amount of cash necessary to purchase a tract of land we wanted at that time. But to show you that any man will be helped if he tries to help himself, we went to the Honorable C.S. McCall, a man that has good will for all and ill will for none. To him we made our wants and wishes known, and he being a man that has sympathy for the poor, opened his treasure and loaned us money enough to pay for the land, which was $1,000. And then he waited very patiently on us until we could pay the said amount back. We succeeded in raising the amount and returned it to him. And today we have the land paid for, and it was through the kindness of Mr. McCall that the people in the town of Clio own homes of their own. We feel at a loss to find words strong enough to express our sincere thanks to him for his kind favors and gentle dealings with us. We will assure him that it is an event that will be fresh in our memories until we have spent our last moments on earth. And we ask him to ever feel that we are his well wishes in his undertaking in this life, and when his earthly tabernacle is dissolved, may he have a building not made with hands, but eternally in heaven. We think that's where he ought to go for his love for the poor. Now in conclusion, let me say to the colored people of Marlboro County that instead of you tramping around from one state to another, walking through the deep sands and climbing high hills, seeking for some easy place where money grows on trees, better for you to put your shoulder to the wheel of energy in this county and secure homes for yourself. For a rolling stone never gathers much moss. No more excuses, just try to help yourself. And if you find yourself powerless, to go to some good man like Mr. McCall, and you will be successful in your effort. Now see to it for your own sake, your wives, and your children. Yours respectfully, A.L. Adrina.
Great-grandfather, I'm your great-granddaughter Gladys. Sir, I wish I had known you. I would like to have had your caring and advice to help me with the problems I have come up against in this world. Great-grandfather, this is such a different world from which you have lived in. There are many new challenges facing the African American enrollment in colleges are increasing by 10% every year. But many African Americans continue to struggle with poverty and prejudice. Great-grandfather, I thank you for who you were and what you have done. I will always cherish your gift of loving kindness.
The muse of history. My work is to muse. For example, I ponder this church. Have you ever thought about this church? What is the meaning of this church? Is it a monument to the energy of the times? The cornerstone of this church was laid in 1920. And in the 1920s there was a fall of the cotton prosperity. Cotton dropped by several cents a pound. A depression followed, and the population of Clio declined. The members of Trinity Methodist Church will be filled with much heartache and disappointment at their inability to complete the sanctuary of the church. But one of their members, the optimistic, the ever-optimistic John Clarence Covington, told his friends and family of his belief that a new generation would complete the sanctuary. Would you like to know a little bit about what happened to the people you met on this tour? I'll tell you a little. Marcella Calhoun will marry Bromfield Rogers in December of this year as she had planned. And the couple will raise their family in the house her father built. She will collect many books, which will cover the walls of her living room. And over the years, she will see many changes in Clio and her country. And those who know her well will say she has a very positive attitude about change. A.L. Calhoun Jr. will continue to run his store on Main Street. He and his wife Sally will have 9 children. Sally will die prematurely in 1926, 4 years after the birth of their youngest son. A.L. Jr. will die in 1948. 3 of his sons will continue to operate his store as late as 1994. His granddaughter, Sherry Gillespie, will be instrumental in putting Clio on the National Register of Historic Places and will contribute many resources regarding local history to her community. Adrina Bennett Covington will continue to raise her family in the house beside her brother's home. She will have her daughter Elizabeth take piano lessons and practice at least 1 hour daily. Elizabeth will plead with her mother to let her quit piano lessons, but Adrina will cry and remind Elizabeth she is her only little girl. Elizabeth will grow up to be a Latin teacher and later a music teacher. Adrina will die in 1952. Reverend J.J. Brown will serve Clio Presbyterian Church until 1912, when Clio and Carolina Presbyterian Church will call Reverend C.G. Brown to become full-time pastor residing in Clio. Clio Baptist Church will erect a beautiful brick building in 1912. Trinity Methodist Church, which began its brick building in 1920, will see the completion of its sanctuary in 1948, fulfilling the prophecy of Mr. J.C. Covington, who strives to see the sunshiny side of life. St. Peter's African Methodist Episcopal Church will continue to stand as late as 1994, and Mr. Paul Woods, the young man who ran the cussing school out in the reeds behind the schoolhouse, will grow up to be a Methodist minister. Alexander Ivy will die in 1910, leaving an estate to his children, along with the legacy of his values about work, education, family, and church. His son Walter will acquire more than 400 acres of land through his diligent work and will receive an honorary degree in agriculture from South Carolina State College. Many of Ivy's grandchildren and great-grandchildren will move away from Clio, only to learn later of their wise and resourceful ancestor who helped organize the community which nurtured them. And so you see that time passes on, only to become history for a new generation. I wonder about the meaning of 1907 to you people. Do you wish to sit for simpler times when you could sit on the porch and watch the world go by? Do you yearn for one of those big fancy hats? What is the meaning of a hat? Would you like to sing more? Do you yearn for closer family ties and homemade ginger snaps? Would you like to spend more time in prayer? Would you like to see all men and women of all races and religions achieve the American dream? And what is the American dream? Would you like to feel more optimistic and confident about the future? Well, I am Clio, and my work is to muse. The questions are for me to ask, but the answers are for you and you. And you.
We would like to take this opportunity to express our thanks and appreciation to those who made this project possible. First, to the actors and actresses, to Kathy Schaefer, who played Marcella Calhoun, to Vernon Chandler, who played A.L. Calhoun Jr., to Julie Powers, who played Adrina Bennett Covington, to Reverend Jim Dixon, who played Reverend J.J. Brown, to Jill Powers and Elizabeth Schaefer for playing the two Clio children. Thanks to Richard Dixon, who played Alexander Ivy, and Gladys Williams, who played herself, the great-granddaughter of Alexander Ivy. Thanks to Deb Chandler as Clio, the Muse. And thanks to Amelia Hall, who practiced her part but due to illness could not participate in the reenactment. Thanks to those who made monetary contributions for costumes. To Arp and Mary Calhoun, whose contribution is in honor of A.L. Calhoun Jr. To Gladys Williams, in honor of Walter Ivy, son of A.L. Ivy. To Martha Williams, in honor of A.L. Calhoun Jr. To Mrs. Robert Crawford, in honor of A.L. Calhoun Jr. To Monroe and Elizabeth Ann Covington Cottingham, in honor of John Clarence and Adriana Bennett Covington, and James Carlisle and Carrie Lee Covington. To Donnie McDonald, in honor of all Cliotians. Thanks to those who provided historical information and stories, including Sherry Gillespie, Elizabeth Covington McIntyre, Olive Graham, Myrtle Reynolds, Howard and Eunice Rogers, Arp and Mary Calhoun. Thanks to the Marlboro Players and the Marlboro Arts Council for technical assistance, especially to Alberta Limcomb and Faye McLaurin. Thanks to Deb Chandler for researching and writing the scripts. Thanks to John Clarence Covington for the videography and editing of the tapes. Thanks to Gabriel Johnson and the Johnson family for assistance with the logistics of this production. Thanks to Connie Hodgkinson and Joyce Bramall for assistance in preparing the costumes. Thanks to Jean Quick, the hairstylist, for Kathy Schaefer's hair. Thanks to all who allowed their buildings and homes to be used for this reenactment. Thanks to Trinity Methodist Church, to Deb and Vernon Chandler, the Calhoun Brothers Store, Dennis and Connie Hodgkinson, the Clio Presbyterian Church, Marvin and Jean Calhoun, thanks to Uzi Wilson, and also the Free Spirit Holiness Church. Finally, a special thanks to all of you, muses and history lovers alike, who really made it all worthwhile.